There is a meta project. It's not just a political project. It's a cultural project around restoring trust that I think makes what we're trying to do in some ways more challenging, also more imperative.
Well, hello out there in podcast land. Welcome to yet another edition of the Liberal Patriot podcast. I'm your host, Rui Teixeira, and I come at you every couple of weeks with the very finest in heterodox conversation and analysis with the most interesting and stimulating guests. And today I'm, incredibly happy to have someone I've admired for a while, Congressman Jake Auchincloss. Now, Jake is the representative from the 4th District of Massachusetts, a Democrat. His district is kind of in the southern area. It runs from the Boston suburbs like Newton down to the blue-collar town of Fall River. And I might add, Congressman Jake, I was very pleased to see that when you visit your site, you can see stuff in Portuguese, which is like, wow, that's great. You know, as someone of Portuguese heritage, that brought a smile to my face. Now, Jake has a very interesting career. I mean, has a very elite education, Harvard, MIT, all that sort of thing. But he also joined the Marine Corps and served honorably there in Afghanistan and in Panama. And if I have this right, you're still a major in the Marine Corps Reserve?
The individual ready reserve. I'm not getting called up anytime soon.
Okay. Well, you're busy anyway. And he's been a businessman in various different flavors. So he's got quite an interesting background. He was on the Newton City Council, I guess, elected to 3 terms starting in 2015. And then in 2020 was when you got elected to Congress, and you've been there ever since. One thing, though, that people may not know about you, if they, to the extent they follow congressional politics, is that you're leader of a new group called the Majority Democrats, which I'm very fond of, but I have a feeling a lot of listeners don't know much about it. So, Jake, why don't you tell us about the Majority Democrats and what motivated the various electeds who constitute that group to get together?
First, thanks for having me on. Long-time reader, first-time caller, so be here.
God bless you, sir.
And Majority Democrats is a group of elected officials who seek to be the vanguard that reinvents the Democratic Party by 2028, the presidential primary. There are 32 of us to start. Importantly, not just members of Congress, although we have them, or senators, though we have them, but governors-to-be, people like Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, and state house leaders and mayors. And I really want to emphasize the mayors in particular because the locus of trust in American politics these days lies with local leaders, in particular mayors, who are getting stuff done in a non-ideological way. And trust is the premium of American politics. And the first party to build back generational trust is the party that will earn the right to govern in this country going forward. So I think it's important that we have mayors, state leaders, and federal officials.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I mean, and obviously it's not exactly a state secret at this point that the Democrats aren't really trusted in a lot of different ways at a lot of different levels. And in line with that, when I read over some of the materials that Majority Democrats have and things you've written, you actually talked at one point about the Democrats being in a permanent minority status, potentially. Yes. And that MAGA has really managed to succeed in a realignment of American politics that was quite, unexpected, but nevertheless quite real. I think, as you point out, the current Democratic coalition looks more like the Dole coalition of 1996 and the Obama coalition of 2008. So talk a little bit about that. How did we get there? And what are the prospects for moving out of it?
You've written persuasively about how we got there. I won't dwell on it. Suffice to say, we lost rural America, I think might be a one-sentence summation. And of the 50 fastest growing counties in America, 0 voted for Democrat.
Oh, is it 0 this time? Yeah, it was in low single digits before, but now we've hit 0, huh? Not good.
0.
Not good.
So even before the Republicans rigged the maps, whether it's in 26, 28, after the census in 2030, Democrats are in a cul-de-sac of electoral demography. We're already in a system that prioritizes rural representation because of the way the Senate and the Electoral College works. So as a party, we're going to be locked out of the levers of influence. And so we need to reinvent ourselves around a realigned electorate. Starting in 2016, and I think coming to fruition in 2024, the electorate has been changing. You had mentioned Fall River. Fall River is the biggest city in my district. It's a multi-ethnic working class city. Voted for Democrats every single presidential election cycle since Calvin Coolidge. And I think the only reason that Republican got their vote is because he was a Bay Stater. But in 2024, Fall River went for Donald Trump. And if that doesn't tell you where the party is at, I don't know what else can. So what Majority Dems is trying to do is to define a new center, because the party that defines what the center is the party that controls the terms of debate, and is the party that can thereby campaign and deliver in a compelling fashion. So that requires that we adopt ideas from disparate factions of American ideology, from progressives, their insistence on a level playing field as well as equal rules for everybody, from populists, their hostility and skepticism of corruption and corporate capture, from traditional conservatives, their reverence for faith, family, and the flag, from libertarians, their hostility to centralized or personalized power and their support for free enterprise. There's good ideas across the board, bad ideas too, but we should take the good ideas, we should piece them together into a refreshing and relevant platform that defines for the American imagination what the center is, and that galvanizes that exhausted majority of Americans, those 2/3 who feel hectored, alienated from the flanks of both parties.
Well, how much of a market do you think there really is within the Democratic Party for this kind of politics? I think you've correctly identified some of the problems, the idea of being cross-ideological in terms of the policies you promulgate and sort of where you're willing to borrow ideas from. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. It's not clear it makes a lot of sense to a lot of people in the Democratic Party who seem to be quite content just to roll with the same old playbook. And I think, as you and many people have pointed out, it's like Trump, 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 right? So long as we scream enough at Trump, that'll suffice.
To do it, we need a fusion of three things: ideas, talent, and courage. Majority Dems, I believe, is starting with great talent. These mayors, these governors-to-be, these members of Congress are authentic, compassionate, intelligent leaders who can connect in a real way with voters. They've done it election cycle over election cycle, and they understand that the status quo is broken economically and politically. It also takes ideas. We talked about drawing these ideas from across American life, but we also have to forge them into something that is mimetic, that is digestible in this very fractured, short attention span media ecosystem that we in. So, we're the party that's going to treat cost disease in housing and healthcare. We're the party that's going to cure Alzheimer's disease by 2050. We're the party that's going to build 1,000 trade schools to give the next generation the skills necessary to build 5 million homes and 100 gigawatts of clean energy. Like, we need to get out there with ideas that make sense to people intuitively and that connect with their everyday anxieties. But then finally, we need the courage to be able to challenge the vested interests. Easy to go after the Republicans. One, they make it easy because they have so many appalling ideas and actions, but also politically easy to go after Republicans. Harder to propose ideas that can, cause disconsternation or criticism from your own side. But voters perceive our reluctance to do that, and it costs us credibility. We have to be willing to challenge the status quo on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, let's look back a little bit in history here to the last time Democrats really had a robust reform movement after a series of defeats, which was in the 80s with the Democratic Leadership Council. What do you think are the similarities and differences between now and when the DLC came into action? I can think of a few, but I'm curious what your take is on it.
I want to hear yours, so I'll be brief in mine. Obviously, 35 years have passed, so many things have changed about society and culture. I think what is similar is that fusion of talent, ideas, and courage is still necessary, right? I think if you look at the DLC, they were bringing those three ingredients to bear. What has changed is trust in the early 90s, there was still a relatively high degree of trust in institutions in American life, media and political institutions. That has severely degraded. And so now there is a meta project. It's not just a political project, it's a cultural project around restoring trust that I think makes what we're trying to do in some ways more challenging, also more imperative.
Yeah, I guess I'd agree with that. I mean, some other differences I can think of is back when the DLC was starting out in the mid 80s, there was a bigger body of electeds who were already kind of a fairly easy sell on the idea that Democrats had gone off the rails. There were more electeds from the Midwest and the South or in kind of swingy districts to whom it was relatively easy to appeal. And it seems like one thing that's changed about the party is that a lot higher proportion of representatives and electeds are in districts that basically never split their votes, are deeply blue, and don't feel the kind of pressure to compromise and do things differently than a national party is doing that I think people had back in the 1980s. Another thing Will Marshall pointed out in this article by Ron Brownstein on sort of reform movements within the Democrats is when the DLC sort of put out its shingle, there wasn't a lot of competition. I mean, the DLC was how people joined up and signaled that they were interested in being a different kind of Democrat. And now, for better or worse, there's sort of more competition. There's a variety of groups that have opened their doors in the last period of time, and obviously there's a lot of overlap between them, but it is kind of a disparate group of groups. And, as Will pointed out, to some extent, they tend to be more influenced by consultants. That's not true of your group, which is basically electeds and is therefore, I might add, probably the closest analog to the DLC. But I mean, it seems to me those are pretty big differences. I guess another thing I'd mention, I'm curious what you think about this, is I followed the DLC carefully when it was evolving. I actually joined up with them for a brief period when I hung out with Will and Al at their office near Union Station. And, they're very combative. I mean, they picked fights. They were absolutely not afraid to go at it, to piss off people on their own side. Do you feel like the willingness to do that is really there with your group or in general among some of these reform Democrats? I sense a certain, gingerly approach to this. I mean, people a little bit cautious about really picking fights. What do you think?
I think your point about fewer cross-pressured politicians is right on. That's exactly right. It's just a function of our gerrymandered system with partisan primaries, right, that have really created two disparate red and blue clouds rather than anything purple in the middle. Mm-hmm. I think that's right. The American public ideologically, though, is still a normal distribution, right? As you know, if you filed the American electorate into a college football stadium, gave them that 13-point socioeconomic conservatism test, and asked them to go to the yard line that lined up with where they scored on that test, they would still be between the 40-yard lines. Yeah, we are more tribal now as a country, mm-hmm. but not any more polarized than we were 40 years ago, despite what cable news and social media make money by telling people, right? And so in some ways, that actually accentuates the opportunity that we have because the American public is still there. The American public still wants it, but the criticism and the pressure is much more intense. And thereby, I think that the willingness to challenge these ideas will be even more resonant. You're right to be skeptical. I think that's fair. It needs to be shown, not just told. And what is important to me is that we don't go out and pick gratuitous fights just to kind of like prove that we can, right? Like I'm not interested in picking fights just to get a Twitter back and forth and win mm-hmm. some outrage Olympics. What I'm interested in is let's put out good policy. Let's, talk about education, for example.
Okay.
Let's put out really good policy on education. Let's talk about surging one-on-one tutoring to every student who's behind on reading and mathematics. Let's talk about adopting some of the best literacy practices from Mississippi and Louisiana and other avatars of the literacy miracles in the South. Let's talk about building out trade schools. Let's talk about differential pay for teachers. As the National Parents Union mm-hmm. is set to propose, right? Like, let's talk about these ideas and explain why they're the best thing to deliver outcomes that the middle class cares about. And if we attract criticism because of that, okay, let's handle that criticism and let's stand firm for our ideas and our values. but it's got to be because we are out there saying what we are for, and other people are saying that they're against that. We don't want to just come out and say we're against stuff, because frankly, for the last decade, Democrats have been declaring that we're against things, most noticeably Donald Trump.
Right.
And I think people are a little tired of it.
Yeah, granted. I mean, but don't you think that as a matter of practical politics, once you start advancing an education program that breaks with orthodoxy in some critical ways, and I know one thing you were very upset about was the incredibly lengthy period of school closures that took place in this country around the COVID pandemic. And, let's face it, the teachers unions, were up to their eyeballs in that one. So, which is one big actor you have to worry about, I think, if you try to, promote a really reformed program around education. I mean, conflict with the teachers unions strikes me as kind of inevitable. And that was, back to the DLC. They loved to mix it up with some of the big union actors where they thought they were going off, basically their policies didn't make sense.
We should have the best classrooms in the world, and any fight that is necessary to pick to get to the best classrooms in the world, we should be willing to have. One of my first positions when I was a city councilor in Newton was pro-charter school. I've been, as you said, my day one issue when I got elected to Congress was reopening the schools. The school closures during the pandemic were a predictable, predicted catastrophe academically and socially, emotionally for our students. I put the blame, though. I mean, that to me, though, is about elected officials not ultimately focused on outcomes, but rather getting too fixated on process. Of course, the teachers unions are going to come with their set of demands oriented towards their constituency. It's the job of elected officials to balance those equities against the demands of a more diffuse, but I think, more critical group of people, which is the students themselves. And I don't think that happened. And that is something that Democrats need to own, and then more importantly, need to go out and fix.
Right. Yeah, it's a heavy lift, though, because I think that people do underestimate the damage that the school closures policies did, and that people remember this. So it is a heavy lift to get people in the space of thinking Democrats aren't about stuff like that. Plus, we really made a big mistake. We're about all the other things that you were talking about. Do you think Democrats are willing to admit that they made essentially a big mistake keeping with the school closures for as long as they did?
I mean, I
know you do, but in general, yeah.
I would say it's a deeper issue, which is, first of all, no, I don't hear a lot of that. But frankly, I wouldn't necessarily want to hear a lot of that unless I was also hearing a compelling agenda for education. I don't think you go out and say, we messed this thing up 5 years ago, and then people are going to say, okay, well, what's next? And if you don't have an answer for that, then you probably should hold off on mea culpa. And so what's been more disappointing to me is that education just hasn't featured at all in our conversation about what is the good life and how is our party on the side of progress and improvement. To me, it's one of the big three issues, right? To me, it's classrooms, it's corruption, and it's cost disease. And we got to make those three issues central to our constellation of ideas as a party, bold ideas for education, because I think people intuit that if they want their kids to have a better life than they did, which is the essence of the American dream, to me, the classroom's front and center in that equation. Sure.
Well, let's talk about a thing you just mentioned, though, cost disease. I mean, who among us does not like to talk about Baumol's cost disease? Because I think it's an absolutely critical concept, if a little bit wonky, I guess, for some people. But talk to us about that and how you think the Democrats could actually cut the Gordian knot there.
Absolutely. So the premise of cost disease is that inflation is not evenly spread across the economy. Everyone's familiar with inflation. We know what it feels like. What is less obvious is that different sectors have wildly different amounts of inflation. So healthcare, housing, utilities have inflated 2-3 times as fast as overall inflation. Meanwhile, electronics, a lot of manufactured goods have actually deflated. They've gotten cheaper in real terms relative to the overall economy. And it's become very typical for policymakers to think about, well, how do we make housing or healthcare or utilities cheaper by looking inside those sectors, by trying to focus on what's failing. And my view is when you want to make something better, you should focus on what works. So what I say is look at the sectors of American life that got cheap really fast. Ask what happened there and try to adopt those policies and those approaches into the sectors that have gotten really, really expensive. Again, housing, healthcare, utilities, probably the top three for the middle class family. And the answer is you really want to do three things. You want to cut regulations that are holding back production, that are dysregulating production. You want to adopt technology that allows you to automate at scale, to mass manufacture something. And you want to challenge the special interests that artificially keep prices high, that have established middlemen or monopolistic positions. Those three steps together allow you to cure a sector of cost disease. And each sector has different policies, technologies, special interests, but those three elements are critical to getting them deflated and more affordable for the middle class.
This way, isn't that kind of just, I mean, it's another way of expressing what this sort of loosely organized abundance movement is about, is it not? I mean, that they're a lot about getting rid of the regs and procedures that are preventing any kind of real efficiency in building, or do you think there's a difference there?
Part of it, I think a lot of the abundance proposals, which I support, are nested into that first part that I just mentioned, which is cutting regulations that are holding back production. Here's where I think, though, there is a little bit of an important difference. The way to make something cheap is to turn that thing into a product that can be mass manufactured. So let's use the example of computers, which we're all familiar with. 100 years ago, a computer was literally a person. There was a group of people who would work together side by side in office buildings. They were called computers, and they penciled out algorithms. That service, very labor intensive, very low productivity, became a product when someone built the first vacuum tube computer system. And that first product was super expensive too. But then it became mass produced. And now computers are super cheap. Your iPhone does more computations than trillions of those human computers could have done 100 years ago. And where I think that the simple idea of, just like unlock production misses is that 100 years ago, if that's the approach you had taken, you would have said, well, what are the occupational requirements to be a human computer? We should cut those regulations, and we should make it easier to like hire human computers. And it would have been very focused on the here and now of just like more human computers, when the actual opportunity, the way that you were actually going to make computing cheap, was never going to be by having it be a service. It was by turning it into a product. And we see this today with housing, for example. Housing is a very labor intensive industry. Everything is individually stick built, individual projects. The ability to allow manufacturing to eat more and more of that construction in the long run is how we're actually going to make housing much more affordable, because you allow it to be treated for cost disease.
Well, yeah, I think that's really a great point, and that is also something I've wondered about relative to the abundance movement that they're kind of leaving out. I actually attended a conference in Berkeley last weekend called the Progress 2025 conference. And there's a lot of overlap between those folks and the abundance folks. But what the progress people are really into is it has a lot to do with what you're saying. I mean, they just want, they want to accelerate progress in general, not just get rid of regulations. And part of progress, I think, as you're outlining, is we want to change the things we're producing. I mean, we want to make it into a product. We want to sort of harness that scientific achievement and economic dynamism that can bring those things forward. So, and
I think there's two criticisms that can get levied against this that I want to pre-butt, because they're both good faith criticisms. One is, well, you're talking about getting rid of jobs. And what I would push back on is that people have been saying that for so long as there's been technology. And what we repeatedly see is that technology creates new, hard to foresee jobs. The U.S. labor force used to be 90% agricultural. It's about 2% agricultural now. We produce more food than we ever have before. And people found different jobs to do as we went from farm to factory. Similarly, manufacturing became much more productive. And there was a new wave of jobs that emerged. Doesn't mean that there's not a role for the public sector in ensuring that these are good jobs with strong protections. That is not the case. But it does mean that simply saying that technology is a job killer really misses the opportunity ahead of us, because the actual job killer is this president's approach to tariffs, where he's trying to take back manufacturing jobs from other countries.
Yeah,
That's
it doesn't
not the way
seem
it works.
well thought out, I've got to say.
No, and the truth is the manufacturing jobs of the future are not going to be people in America screwing in screws into iPhones like Howard Lutnick thinks. The manufacturing jobs of the future in this country are going to be taken from things that are currently being done as services,
right.
not being taken from other countries. And that is the opportunity we miss when we become inveterately hostile to technology. At the same time, though, and this points to point 3, cut regulations that hold back production, adopt technology. But number 3 is you got to challenge the special interests. And that can mean the technology companies, these social media firms that are miners and merchants of digital dopamine that are trying to get kids hooked on AI chatbots. We should bulldoze them. We should rake them over the coals. There is nothing productive or market enhancing or socially beneficial about their business model. And nobody's willing to challenge them, and that we got to change that.
Yeah, boy, and they're a tough opponent. What do you think? As sort of a little bit off topic, I suppose. Do you think we're currently in an AI bubble? In addition to all the other problems with AI, are we just incredibly over-indexed now on AI and how much it's allegedly going to produce?
I don't think there's any. Yeah, I think we are. I think 2 things are true. One, we're in an AI bubble, which is to say that the valuations are divorced from the discounted future cash flows. If we want to get super wonky about the definition of a bubble, right? And there's increasingly this circular propping up where companies are both customers and investors in each other, which should always set off some alarm bells. I think we're clearly in a bubble. Doesn't mean that the effects of AI won't be profound and it won't be a general purpose technology and that important infrastructure won't get built out. In general, we tend to overestimate the effects of technology in the short term and underestimate their effects in the long term. We saw that the internet in the 1990s was a bubble and it got overbuilt, but that infrastructure became the platform for a lot of Web 2.0 companies. My hope is as we shift and the platform again changes and we build out new infrastructure, it's a inflection point that allows us to challenge these Web 2.0 behemoths, the Metas, the TikToks, the Twitters of the world, because I think they have been some of the most nefarious actors in human history. These are the wealthiest, most powerful corporations in the history of the world. They've been corrosive to our civil society. They have put themselves above accountability to the American public. And I think we should use this technological shift as a moment, a political moment to tear them down. Because I know the American public wants us to. I hear it from parents and from students constantly. These smartphones are making kids miserable.
Yeah. How do you square that, though, with the fact that the tech sector is enormously powerful and also in some ways enormously productive? As you're pointing out, it could, we may be in a bubble, but in the end, it's probably pretty darn important. I think that was what Jeff Bezos says. Yeah, it's a bubble, but ultimately, this is a hugely important technology. So you worry Democrats are perceived as being too anti-tech? Certainly I got that impression when I was out at this conference in Berkeley that for a lot of people in that sector, they don't see the Democrats as really being their friends these days. And it goes beyond, sort of being combative about how they handle social media and so on. There's just a general sense that Democrats, I think the way they put it is they don't want to let us cook, like get stuff done, expand the frontiers of possibility. They're not with us. They're part of the old world or something.
So when I was at MIT, I was the director of the entrepreneurship competition. Next week, I'm going back to MIT to be at their Tough Tech conference. I think based on, as you've heard in our conversation, I'm very pro-tech when it makes things better, faster, cheaper for my constituents, when it's solving hard problems, whether we're talking about the etiology of cancer, whether we're talking about industrial robotics, talking about AI bots that can deliver, mental therapy or can help kids with dyslexia learn how to read because they can do it at scale. Like, all about it. Let's lean into it. Not here for internal documentation at Facebook that says that it's acceptable for chatbots to have, quote, sensual conversations with 12-year-olds. That was internal documentation for Facebook engineers. Yeah. Totally inappropriate. These companies have been held harmless from any liabilities through Section 230 for 30 years. They have abused that set of special privileges to put themselves above the law. You're now seeing a proliferation of deep fakes that are targeting young women. And I think that the American public is very ready for a conversation that says, we want the tech. We're not trying to go the EU route. That's not where we want to be. Right, we want to have world-leading, cutting-edge, frontier firms for science and technology. We should be doubling, by the way, our NIH budget. We should be curing Alzheimer's our flagship scientific enterprise. Like, all here for it. And we recognize that the dopamine reinforcement system in the developing brain is very sensitive, that social media companies and AI companies and online gambling companies take advantage of developing brains and immature judgment paired with a lot of risk-seeking behavior. And we're not going to let them do that because we have a compelling interest in the well-being of our adolescents. And we're going to tell them hands off. And if they're going to complain that means that we lose to China, I say bullshit. Because the Chinese have some of the strongest rules around tech for their under 18 population of any country in the world. So it's just nonsense.
Yeah, and actually that's poorly understood about the Chinese system and how they handle it.
Kids can't use, under 14, they basically can't use social media, and they are required to there's a lot more educational programming on their social media.
Yeah, I think you've hit the sweet spot there in terms of letting the tech sector cook, as it were, at the same time as you try to rein in obvious abuses and problems, which I think, the data suggests people are pretty worried about these things. So it's not like you're going to have to talk everybody into this stuff. Well, actually, since we're talking about China, I mean, how do you think that fits in with the overall challenge for the Democrats, for Reform Democrats in general, for abundance or progress, whatever you might care to name? I mean, it does seem like China is our competitor in the 21st century. I think people perceive it that way. And I think my general impression is if you want the American public to endorse doing big things, frequently part of that is feeling like part of a national enterprise, a mission, sort of a patriotic crusade to accomplish something. And frequently it involves an enemy or at least a very serious competitor. Do you think Democrats are ceding that territory a little bit to the Republicans, or how do you handle that? I mean, a lot of Democrats worry that, I think, particularly our so-called progressive Democrats, that's just nationalistic. That's kind of bad. We don't really want to do any of that kind of stuff. I mean, we're citizens of the world.
I was a member of the Select Committee on China last Congress. It was a bipartisan, handpicked group of lawmakers who were thinking about long-term strategy. And I think that China is our pacing adversary for the 21st century. And we should emphatically say that the mission is to win, that the Chinese Communist Party's ideology is toxic for the well-being of humanity. They view individuals as pawns of a state. We believe that the individual has inherent dignity and worth, and that freedom is their birthright. I think our ideas are better. I think this is not, and we should absolutely go toe-to-toe on ideas. I think there's three elements of that at the highest level: invent, build, and cooperate, which is to say, and Brian Deese put this well in a recent piece. He said, for a long time, America was good at inventing and bad at building stuff. And China was good at building stuff, but bad at inventing stuff. And the country that can do both first wins the economy. If you can both invent and build in a top tier way, you're going to win. And the problem is China's getting better at inventing faster than we're getting better at building.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Dan Wang kind of makes that argument in addition to other parts 100%. Of his argument. But he's basically, look, if you think the Chinese are just about building big infrastructure, which they do extremely well, you're just wrong about that.
No,
they're making leaps and bounds in a lot of highly technical areas. And they're not letting any grass grow under their feet. They're like 150 miles an hour going forward. And so we got a lot of serious catch up to do. One thing about sort of a whole ecosystem of invention and research, not to mention procedures and regulations that prevent us from building as fast as efficiently as we'd like. Obviously, we want to reform all that, and Democrats want to be in the forefront of that. At least the majority of Democrats do. Do you worry, though, that who are you going to trust to blow up excess bureaucracy and procedures and stupid regulations and stuff like that? I mean, the Republicans sort of are quite willing to do that. I mean, Trump may be kind of half crazy, but they're certainly not afraid to sort of set about them with a 2x4 and just get rid of stuff. Whereas I think Democrats are not the get rid of stuff party at this point, or at least they don't have that image. What can the Democrats do to show that they actually are willing to actually be fairly, strong and uncompromising about getting rid of stupid things that prevent us from doing good things?
I think already there are elements that have shown that. So I think the most successful grassroots Democratic movement of the last decade was the YIMBY movement. And I look in my own backyard, Cambridge, Massachusetts, voted for Kamala Harris, I think 85 to 15% in 2024. So a very progressive city.
Right.
Just passed a land use and zoning bill of 100 pages in which something like 92 of those pages were just cutting old regulations around building of apartment buildings functionally. Because we know that apartment buildings, those 2 to 20 unit complexes, are the workhorse of housing affordability. And Cambridge is getting it done, much to their credit. Now we have to make that movement fractal. We have to apply it at different levels to different sectors. So housing, continue to press on that. We need 5 million more units of housing over the next decade. But the next big one to me is energy, because clean, abundant energy is a universal subsidy for lower cost of living. And it's critical to climate action. For example, I'm doing legislation right now on geothermal. Geothermal is a sweet spot, high base load, affordable, clean, and can be built relatively quickly, unlike nuclear. And so there's new technologies for drilling really deep with geothermal using microwaves and plasma. And we should make it easier to permit for that. Republicans love it. They love to drill. Democrats love it. It's clean. And bring it together. And we can show people, hey, you're worried about your utility bills going up 15%. We're going to get this in 2 years. We're going to get this done. We are going to put more supply onto the system.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a hot issue. Democrats have certainly woken up to the idea that affordability is kind of first and foremost in a lot of voters' minds. Again, you've got this sort of millstone around your neck of the Biden administration and the perceived failure of their policies to do much good about the cost of living. In fact, be pretty bad. And it does seem like the party's waking up to that. I mean, a lot of these things you're talking about, though, they're fairly long range. I mean, it'll take a while to take effect. Maybe that's the best we can do, because it'll take a while for voters to decide that Democrats are really a party that is about controlling costs. And if actually, I thought you made a sort of a broader, sort of almost umbrella point about a lot of these things, like inflation, like crime, like immigration, et cetera. I mean, these are to some extent questions of social order. Democrats seem to preside over a system that was out of control, and that wasn't orderly, and that was hard to understand. I think that talk a little bit about that, because I think that's an important point. When I think social order, I don't think the Democrats, and I don't think most voters think that as well.
I think that was a key driver of the collapse of support for Joe Biden and for Democrats in 24, and indeed across OECD countries, that any of the governing parties, was the confluence of immigration, and particularly the lack of control over the southern border, probably 5 million people without documentation crossing, scenes of urban unrest throughout American cities, and paired with inflation, which felt like this out of control exogenous phenomenon, all gave people a sense of disorder. And if there's one thing humans hate, it is a sense of disorder and uncertainty and a lack that you have agency in your own life and your own outcomes. We as a people deeply believe that we want to be the authors of our own destiny, and when we feel like that's slipping away, it leads to incredibly fear-based voting, I guess I would say. And so Democrats, we got to be the party of law and order. We got to be the party of national security. And we've got to be the party of a sound currency and stable prices, because these are the things that are the pillars of a sense of social order. None of these things require that we yield on core values, by the way. Being the party of law and order, yes, that means defending the law and the Constitution. It also means enforcing law and order locally, shoplifting, quality of life violations. Not going to do it in a callous or cruel way, not going to do it with masked ICE agents, but we're going to do it by funding the police, training them, integrating them with mental health response, and ensuring that when people go out to public spaces, they feel safe and they feel like they can bring their kids and they feel like their kids are going to be safe.
Yeah, you're singing my song, Jake. I think you've definitely put your finger on something that's absolutely essential for, sort of a new image for the Democratic Party. But how saleable is this within the party, right? I mean, I think when most Democrats hear law and order or social order, they think it's right coded. I mean, that's sort of not what we're about. We're about fairness. We're about equity. We're about this or about that.
I would really, I'll point to just a few examples within majority Dems or adjacent to majority Dems, but I just think that we're way too indexed, I think, in terms of the media and sort of tastemakers' opinions to a few examples, the outlier examples. You've got Maura Healey, governor of Massachusetts, progressive Democrat, who has delivered real wins on affordability for childcare with a supply side set of reforms. She's giving grants directly to childcare providers. That was not a traditional Democratic approach. The traditional Democratic approach would have been vouchers on the demand side.
Right, yeah.
She's delivering affordability wins on supply side. There was a series of sort of street races and unrest in the greater Boston area. Governor Healey came out hard against that. I mean, she was like, there is no place for disorder or for lawlessness in this state. So I've seen James Tallarico running for Senate in Texas, a pastor, Democrat, a member of majority Dems. And his message is really threaded through with a Judeo-Christian approach to one's neighbors, to justice. And that, again, might strike some Democrats as, oh, we don't do that. Well, we should,
right.
Especially if you want to win Texas.
And you, Jake Auchincloss, are willing to argue with him, and so is James Tallarico. And well, you should, because boy, it ain't going to happen in Texas without that kind of politics, for sure. Reminds me of something else. I mean, in terms of, I wanted to talk about with you is like young men. You've had a few things to say about that, and one thing that famously the Democratic Party is not succeeding in doing is reaching young men who don't see the party as being sympathetic to them and their plight, and they don't find very inspirational at all. So how can we inspire young men to take the Democratic Party more seriously and not think of it as just a scold who doesn't even approve of them?
Yeah, not by meeting them where they're at, as I've heard people say.
Going on Broy podcasts and all that jazz. Yeah,
it's by telling them where they're going. When I was a new graduate, I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. I wanted to be physically challenged. I wanted to be challenged in terms of my leadership capabilities. And I wanted to feel a sense of camaraderie as part of a bigger mission. To me, that was the Marine Corps. For some people, it's going to be, electrical workers 103. For some people, it might be Elks Lodge. For some folks, it might be the church softball team. There's many different ways to find team and purpose and a sense of autonomy in your life, and to do some of the core roles that young men seek to do: the provider, the protector, the procreator. And we should not condescend to those desires. We should encourage young men to find that sense of camaraderie and authorship that they want in their lives. And I think that it doesn't, I think to a large extent, the focus on like going on certain podcasts or talking about certain things kind of misses that deeper point that young men really are looking for a national mission. And the good thing is that we have one, because we got a lot of building to do, and we need their efforts. We need them to sweat and strive in real life. You know
what's good on that sense of mission and sort of building up the country that might appeal to young men is something that's a bit right-coded. It's the American dynamism movement, the hard tech people who are very patriotic and very into building up defense and defense-related industries and actually producing stuff. And they really have a certain unabashed patriotism and reverence for the national interest that I think
not just defense.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's not
they
just
also
defense.
have
You're right.
Education, housing, I think they have a child care company. Like they do a lot.
Right. So you're sympathetic to where they're coming from, even though a lot of Democrats are a little leery about them?
Absolutely. The public-private partnership to build stuff, it goes right towards cost disease, right? It is about pulling back those regulations that are holding back private sector production. It is about adopting technology to get stuff done better, faster, cheaper, which is how you drive higher standards of living. That's what my constituents want. They want their kids to have a higher standard of living than they had before. And then it's taken on the special interest. Sometimes, American dynamism, that's an A16Z effort. Some of those companies might one day get such scale and size that they become the monopolist and the special interest. And if that happens, we'll take them on. But for right now,
later for that,
when they're startups, they're probably up against incumbents. In the defense sector, maybe that's the six primes who have an overly cozy relationship with defense procurement, and they have to be challenged. And the Andurils and the Blue Water Autonomies of the world can get a chance, the Saronics. In other sectors, the special interest is not necessarily directly government. It's more like a small cabal of individuals that have outsized influence in legislation or regulation. You see this in housing a lot, right? It's a very organized but relatively small opposition to new development against the diffuse benefit of more housing.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. Yeah, I'm very, very interested in the American dynamism movement. I've been trying to learn more about it. I met some of those people out at that conference in Berkeley, and I think it's something more Democrats should pay attention to. So I'm totally with you there. Let's think about where the party is today. Would you not say, though, I mean, despite all your terrific efforts of your colleagues, that the momentum is kind of from the left? The momentum is with the Zoran Mamdanis of the world. The momentum is with people on the progressive left who are still, in a sense, hawking their wares, even if it's questionable that that's really the road forward for the Democrats. There's just, and I think it kind of melds in a way that isn't very productive with the sort of the resistance movement, right? I mean, Trump is so bad that the only solution is not to figure. I mean, to me, you should be thinking like night and day about how do you just beat these people. But a lot of it is just, it's emotional. It's like, Trump is so bad and his policies are so bad. We need policies that are essentially the reverse of all that. We need to be as progressive as possible. Zoran Mamdani is the future. He excites the youth, blah, blah, blah. So I'm kind of giving away what I think about it by how I talk about it. What do you think?
I think if you're laying down a gauntlet that majority Democrats need to have a platform, have infrastructure, have resonance and relevance with voters going into the 2028 primary, I agree with you. Mm-hmm. That is we're absolutely up against a challenge in the 2028 primary where we're going to be redefining the party. It's the first open primary, truly open primary since '92, and my group intends to be prepared with a point of view. I think where I'm less skeptical, where I'm more skeptical, I should say, is in reverting back to a tug of war between center and left. Mm-hmm. If that's how we're going to spend the next 3 years, pull one way, pull the other way, right, everyone points to a different scoreboard to decide why they got it right and other people got it wrong, we're missing the bigger opportunity, which is that the electorate has realigned underneath our feet. And the actual opportunity is to take and define issues from across the different sectors. So, specific examples here maybe might be helpful. Like, sure. The left talks about decarceration, big issue for them. Well, you know what? For prisoners over the age of 65, over whom there are many of them incarcerated during the 1990s, it actually doesn't make a lot of sense probably to keep them incarcerated in that part of their age. It's very expensive. Their chances of recidivism over the age of 65 for released prisoners is very, very low, not really a public safety threat. Maybe we should do a big decarceration push over the age of 65, but we should, pair that with a message of how it's also a fiscally responsible thing to do. And, use those savings maybe to invest in a national police training academy to show the best tactics for police response. So there's ways to I really try to get out of this sort of zero-sum tug of war and really try to take the best ideas. And if I get criticized for that, fine, and we're gonna fight back. But we shouldn't start from a position of I have to fight you because you're in a different ideological sector. Democrats will lose if we do that. We'll lose because one thing MAGA is right now is they are unified.
Yeah, no, they're very unified, and I think they're. As a movement, Trump may not appear to be very smart, but I think as a movement, they can be very smart in terms of how they play things. So it's going to be a challenge
disciplined.
And very disciplined. A challenge to vanquish them. Looking forward with the majority Democrats, or is there some particular project you guys are going to be working on to try to spread your influence? What's next for majority Dems?
Well, we're across the board. So we're doing the most exciting thing in the near term is just the events that our 32 members are doing. So mayors on public safety and education, members of Congress on cost of living and energy affordability, they are out there in real life, not mediated by Reddit threads or whatever, talking to people. And I think demonstrating the realness and respect that people don't associate candidly with Democrats. But you're going to see across the board action. So it's policy development, it is recruitment, it is campaigns, it is communications. And one element of that will be adding more members in the year to come. And again, probably a lot more mayors in particular, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, well, watch this space then. I wish you all the best with majority Democrats. And I really urge everybody out there listening to this to pay attention to majority Democrats, because I think they are, if the Democratic Party is going to have a productive future, I'm convinced they're going to be part of it. So you can check out, there's not that much, to be honest, on your website yet, the majority Democrats. But Jake, you do have a Substack that I can recommend to people. It's called Simple But Not Easy. Is that right?
Simple but not easy.
Yeah.
That's how we used to describe infantry tactics in the Marine Corps.
Yeah. Well, there you go. No, it's a great Substack, and the posts on it are always interesting and insightful, I think. So I urge people to do that. And I urge people to, as I say, pay attention to majority Democrats. I don't know if you guys need support, but if you do and it's available, people should give it to you. And, I just couldn't be more pleased to have talked to you. And, I'm excited about what you're trying to do. And, fingers crossed. Hopefully success is in the offing. So thanks a lot for being on Liberal Patriot Podcast. And if you ever come by AEI, I'll buy you lunch.
Reed, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.